Welcome to the official YouTube channel for me, the Colin Cowherd Podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button right there so you don't miss any of our football content this postseason. Going to have instant reactions after every big game. Thanks. Our divisional reaction is presented by Uber Eats. Get game day deals all season long on Uber Eats. It's time to look at this weekend's tastiest matchup in this week's Sunday Night Foodball, brought to you by Uber Eats. All right, here we go. Let's chop it up for over an hour. John Middlekauff, former NFL scout, has his own podcast, 3 and Out. And 27-25 Bills win. I had a 3-0 weekend, which is rare because I've been awful this year. Listen, I feel so bad for Mark Andrews, I just think he's a tremendous player. I remember him in Oklahoma. Yeah. I thought that fumble to me, for Baltimore to come back down and score and have a chance to tie it after that fumble by Mark Andrews, and then the drop by Mark Andrews, which he catches 99 out of 100 times. Before we get into Lamar, this has been one of my favorite tight ends in the league. I thought that fumble, forget the drop. I thought the fumble, it felt like Buffalo didn't score until they got a field goal. I think it's on my notes here somewhere in the third quarter. I thought the fumble really sucked the emotion out of Baltimore.
Yeah, I think Romo had mentioned it. They had scored on essentially 3 straight drives. One of them was a kneel down at the end of the half, but Buffalo couldn't stop them. I mean, the game had kind of shifted. Lamar had settled down. They were running the ball right down their throat. That was, I think we saw tonight and we saw last night, the games were different because obviously this was much lower scoring than the Commander game. You can't turn the ball over at the rates in which the Lions and the Ravens did and win the game. It can't. This is not basketball or baseball where it's a 7 or 5 game series. Your margin for error in a 60-minute game in a half, you could lose a game in a half. Yeah. And I thought when he threw the interception and the fumble in the first half, I'm like, I don't know if they can overcome that. But the Ravens have a good defense. They settled down. They started stopping Josh. Brady started kind of calling some lateral plays. But that Andrews, I'm with you. Mark Andrews is a stud. I mean, for him to have that fumble and that drop, it's hard to shake. I mean, you kind of become the GOAT of the moment.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar's going to take the heat because he had a multiple turnover game. I mean, Buffalo, I think, had 1 penalty and no turnovers. But it was also the fumble that Von Miller picked up. And so it was just, the Mark Andrews drop, the Mark Andrews fumble, the fumble that Von Miller takes in. I thought Lamar played well enough, obviously one awful pick. I thought he played well enough to win. Hell, if Mark Andrews catches it, I would not want to play Baltimore in overtime because I thought they'd seize momentum in the second half. So I think Lamar will get tagged for it. But I'm not blaming C.J. Stroud for the loss in Kansas City. The Texans special teams were awful. They were like collegiate. Goff, he can take the hit. I thought Lamar wasn't as good as Josh Allen. One of the takeaways for me was they didn't ask Josh to do a lot in this game. It was a lot of passes to the backfield. I thought they came in, they didn't want it to be a Lamar versus Josh. I think they looked at the film and thought, we can kind of death by 1,000 cuts. They didn't ask him to make big throws much.
Yeah, to me, this is a coaching loss for the Ravens, just like it was last year against the Chiefs. It feels like when they played last year Mahomes and they played Josh tonight, they're obsessed with trying to prove he could pass. Early in the game, it's like you have the Shaquille O'Neal of running backs who, as they started running as the game went on, it's like, why don't you do this? And then what happened on the 2-point time the first time? They passed as they ran it right down their throat. It's like, why wouldn't you just hand it to them again? But you hit it on the nail on the head. I thought that this game felt like what the Steelers and Ravens used to feel like, right? It's like, okay, the Buffalo Bills said, we're going to be as tough as you. And sometimes that doesn't work for a pass-heavy team. We've seen it with Ohio State against Michigan. And I thought the first half, on their first drive of the game, they ran it right down the Ravens' throats, who their strength is their run defense. It's like, whoa, they are not intimidated. We know Josh can run, but how good were their running backs? Their line is not going to look like Saquon Barkley or anything in terms of yardage, but I thought James Cook was fantastic. The backup was fantastic, was awesome. And it sets the tone in these games Like this game was not going to be like last night. It was going to be lower scoring. Every
Yep.
yard mattered. Every first down mattered. And Sean McDermott deserves credit because his team came in physically ready to match the Ravens, who I think we all would have said are the more physical team, right?
Yeah, no, I think Davis, by the way, if you go read the life story of Davis, that running back, the backup running back, who is a big, strong kid,
Yeah.
it's his life is remarkable. He's bounced around and it's so easy to guy to root for. But I wrote this down. I think Buffalo has a much better offensive line than people give them credit for. Now, we know Philadelphia and Detroit feel like two of the best O-lines in a decade, kind of like that Cowboy line Dak inherited when he was really young.
Yeah.
But I think Buffalo's O-line, now again, we know Deion Dawkins is excellent at left tackle, but I thought there were, one of the only times they failed to me was on that chance to wrap it up and Josh Allen got stuffed near the goal line in the fourth quarter. That was one of the only times where
Did
I
you
thought,
like him
okay,
in the shotgun there?
didn't and don't. I just
same.
don't. So that was one of the few, and he almost tried to lateral it, but that was one of those. That was one of those where they got stuffed. Listen, Sean McDermott is a little like Doc Rivers. We know he's a good enough coach, and Doc ended up with a title, but I find myself really wanting Buffalo to get to a Super Bowl because it's like we all know Lamar Jackson's a really special quarterback. But it's hard when Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes are in their prime and one of them's got Andy Reid. It's like, and by the way, Kansas City and Buffalo may have the two best front offices in the NFL, along with Detroit when it comes to drafting. Rams are pretty good as well. So my takeaway today, I liked Sean McDermott and Buffalo's game plan. I like how they were physical early. They didn't ask Josh to be Superman. It's almost like they prepared a game plan, John, expecting weather to be worse than it was.
The one thing, though, to go back to Lamar about running, it's one thing to run into Mahomes. When you lose to Josh Allen in this moment, I get it was on the road, and you have multiple turnovers, and I will defend his overall play. He was much better today than he was in that AFC Championship game.
Yeah.
But you get to the point where if he ends up with this MVP, and you and I both I think are on the same page here. I don't actually care about awards. You win 3 MVPs. You're on a short list of guys in this league.
Yeah.
You kind of become the James Harden of football really fast. And, I saw on Twitter, this is his 4th game in the playoffs where he has multiple turnovers.
Yes.
And those are type things that, listen, the interception, you can have an interception and then you can have that interception. Right. It was like Jared Goff's pick 6. It's like, Jared, where are you throwing this? It's one thing to have a ball tipped or, a DB just make an incredible play. That when you hit guys in the breadbasket, it's like that can't happen. And then the fumble, it's like you're trying to do too much. Sometimes you got to learn to go down. I mean, that was a big deal with Josh tonight. Did not turn the ball over. They actually played the game, like you said, like I thought the Ravens. I had the Bills tonight, and I had a decent amount of money on them.
Same.
And I got nervous as they started running. I was like, why don't they just run it nonstop? Because the Bills are not built to stop them. But sometimes it feels like, no, we have to prove. Final drive, totally get it. But in the ebb and flow of a game, when it's 14-7 or 14-10, it's like, guys, your great strength right now is you have this Earl Campbell, Walter Payton player in the prime of his career, and your quarterback is, I don't know, the greatest runner in the history of the league. No call pass plays. I don't know if it's Munkin. I don't know if it's Lamar. Combination of them both. I would have ran it like they did against the Steelers 50 times. I never would have called pass plays until I absolutely had to, like the end of the game.
Yeah, in the third quarter, they had that Derrick Henry run, Justice Hill run, Derrick Henry run, then Derrick Henry for the touchdown. They had 68 rushing yards on that one drive in the third. And you're like, that's who they are. By the way, the Bills prepared like it was going to be a blizzard. They only passed the ball 7 times with Josh Allen in the first half. I felt like Baltimore. I felt like I got to give Sean McDermott credit. They came in with a plan. They're like, we're going to create physicality. We believe we can run on them. We're not, we don't know what the weather could get worse than we predict. And, Josh did his Superman stuff, but I really got to give McDermott credit. I thought what did they have? 1 penalty, no turnovers. And even when Mark Andrews dropped that, they still had time left on the clock. I mean, they had like a minute 30 left on the clock. It felt a little like a Kansas City game where I kind of just felt, I really did, John. It's easy in hindsight to say this. I had Buffalo too. I I really thought Buffalo the entire day was going to win the game. And I know a lot of people thought early, here comes Buffalo. They're more physical. But I just liked their game plan. I thought the Bills were really focused, laser focused on what they tried to accomplish.
Well, I think last week when we talked, I said, I think this is going to be a tough matchup for the Bills because the Ravens are so good against the run. And obviously, I would say, separating factor this year than in years past, and even at the end of last year, is James Cook. And it's just like, it's not easy to run it against these guys. And they can run it against you. And it's like, it becomes a time of possession deal. First drive of the game, the Bills had a long, after the Ravens went right down the field and scored. You're like, okay, this is going to be a shootout. The Bills they had 9 carries for 36 yards on that touchdown drive. And it was like, okay, this feels like a Harbaugh brother in Sean McDermott. Like, I'm here for the fight. And
Yeah.
I think the Bills, remember when they've lost to Cincinnati and they've lost to Kansas City in the past, it's like they're not quite tough enough. And listen, personnel-wise, they're
Yeah.
not as tough just because they don't have the bodies as the Ravens. But mentally and the way they showed up with the game plan, they showed up to play like that. And I think that really benefited them as the game went on.
Yeah, I feel bad. Lamar's going to take the hit, but on that Von Miller play, it was a really bad snap. In bad weather, that's a tough snap.
He was
And then
dramatically better than years past in some of his
yes.
flops. He
Yeah,
wasn't a couple bad plays, but overall, I thought he was pretty damn good. That final drive, it was like he looked like midseason Lamar.
that was this week's Sunday Night Football, brought to you by Uber Eats as the official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Use them every week. Uber Eats, the best game day deals all season long. Order now for game day. Uber Eats, love them, use them. Yeah. So, I mean, listen, Kansas City, Buffalo is, I think, what most of us, I mean, I do think Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, I think we can say this now. And I feel bad for Joe Burrow. They had to sell naming rights to pay him. It is an antiquated front office. I mean, it's really sad. And Tobin, the GM, is kind of a powerless guy. So the Chiefs are -1.5 against the Bills. I'll take Buffalo +1.5. I took Buffalo +1.5 today. I think Buffalo's going to go into Arrowhead and win. They're pretty healthy. Boy, Milano, again, making nice plays. That guy doesn't get a ton of credit. Football people know. He made a couple of big plays near the goal line tonight. So I think it's been established. Obviously, where you land matters. And Brady got Belichick and Joe Montana got Bill Walsh, but that's just the way it works. I think Josh Allen and Mahomes, to me, John, have separated themselves as the best 2 quarterbacks in the league. I like Joe Burrow a lot, but he gets hurt, and that's, genetics are what they are. You get hurt, it's part of your legacy. And then I think the next tier of quarterbacks after those two starts with Joe Burrow, and Jayden Daniels may be right behind him. We'll get to that later in the podcast. But I kind of feel like I've watched these NFC teams, John. I do not believe. I think Kansas City and Buffalo are going to win the Super Bowl. One of those two. I just don't think Philadelphia is buttoned up. I think Washington's season will end. If it doesn't, they're just not talented enough. Agree or disagree?
Totally agree. This game feels like 49ers Cowboys 1993 at Arrowhead. And listen, the Chiefs are my people. I probably wouldn't be sitting here with you if it wasn't for them. I do think this is the Bills' year. I think the Bills are going to win next week, and I think they're going to win the Super Bowl. And, for 1 year when I was with Philadelphia, Sean was there, and he's just, he's a really, really impressive guy. I think he's become a really good head coach, and he hired the right coordinator. Going from Dorsey to Joe Brady has changed their offense. But let's be real about this. The Bills, if you look back when I was younger, Manning Brady was a rivalry, but up until 06, 07, Manning could not beat him. And Brady had 3 Super Bowls. That's kind of what this feels like. Lamar Mahomes is not a rivalry. This is the 3rd time in recent memory, and the Bills have lost these games. Like last year, the overtime game where they went 3 plays and 50 yards or whatever. But this is the game. It's Josh versus Mahomes. And listen, you could make the argument because of the lack of playoff success, we got to reorder this. It goes Mahomes, Josh, then Joe Burrow, and then Lamar Jackson. And the one thing, and you just mentioned about Joe Burrow, he does not have the infrastructure that Lamar has. The team that he took to the Super Bowl and went toe-to-toe with Mahomes in the other playoff game that he lost in the AFC Championship game, I'm sorry, he's just accomplished way more. Now, I think, I use the NBA comp sometimes like James Harden or Joel Embiid. In that individual sport, I would much rather have Lamar in football than if I was in basketball and have one of those guys. So I think big picture, I still think the Ravens can win a Super Bowl. But as we sit here in 2025, like it's been a pretty big letdown given a guy that, I mean, the guy could have like 4 MVPs and he
Yeah.
easily could get his third. So this is tough. But the Ravens put themselves in this position having to go on the road. They lost
Yep.
a terrible game to Cleveland. The second week
Raiders.
to the Raiders. That first half against the Chiefs, they didn't play very well. I mean, that Raiders loss was really, really bad. So, I mean, the Ravens and John Harbaugh put himself in this position.
And now for our segment, Hot Off the Press, presented by our friends at Louisiana Hot Sauce. This stuff's great. Bring the food at your big game party to a whole new level with the original Louisiana brand hot sauce. Bold, authentic flavor embodies the rich culinary tradition of Louisiana. I'm going to the Super Bowl in New Orleans. Can't wait. The original Louisiana brand hot sauce, perfect for those who demand great flavor with just the right amount of heat. This stuff is remarkable. All right. Philadelphia going to the NFC Championship against Washington. Again, we'll get to Jayden Daniels later. Philadelphia 28, Rams 22. It was 13-10 Philly at half, closer than I thought. And I'll give the Rams credit. I still feel they're about 4 players away. I think, again, like I felt last year, they're just incredibly coached, smartly quarterbacked, a little Puka reliant. Kyron Williams, again, a big fumble. He fumbles too much. Remember, Cam Akers, they shipped him out of town. He fumbled too much. I feel like Kyron Williams is getting to that point where he's fumbling in big games. But Philadelphia, Jalen Carter was spectacular.
Awesome.
Saquon Barkley was spectacular. And when I watch Philadelphia, I mean, they have the best interior D lineman in the league along with Chris Jones. They have the best running back in the league along with McCaffrey, who's hurt. This team is not led by Jalen Hurts, and it's not a knock. I just feel like it's their physicality on that defensive front. I feel like it's these young corners. I was thinking about this with Saquon Barkley. I always root for great players to play with great teams. LeBron to Miami. Ohtani needed to be a Dodger or a Yankee, not an Angel. And I look at Saquon Barkley, and he was just too damn good to be stuck in a circus in New York. Now, maybe he doesn't rise to Ohtani or LeBron, but I will say this. I really believe this. Just in terms of jumping over people. Remember when he jumped over that player backwards?
Yeah.
John, he is on a short list of the best running backs I've ever seen. Maybe he's not Walter Payton and Barry Sanders. Maybe he doesn't have the dexterity of Christian McCaffrey. John, he's one of the 5 or 6 seminal running backs I've seen in my life in terms of just talent. I think he's sensational.
Yeah, I mean, I think in recent memory, just as a pure runner between the tackles, when you talk about vision, power, and speed, I think he's got to be on the short list with Derrick Henry and Adrian Peterson, who are 2 lock Hall of Famers.
Right.
The difference is Adrian Peterson got to play on some pretty good teams in Minnesota, and obviously Derrick Henry had Vrabel, the Titans, and now he has the Ravens. I thought today, and I said this, I did a quick reaction after that game. I thought today was a pretty big Howie Roseman muscle flex because the quarterback, we watched 4 quarterbacks today. 3 of them all have something in common when they pass, and then there's Jalen Hurts, who just feels like everyone's so critical of Kellen Moore. It's like, guys, you can call any play you want. In the pocket, he's a coin flip. You have no clue what's coming, and it usually it's more tails than heads. Saquon Barkley they got for under $30 million guaranteed in a day and age when guards are getting $50 million. Jalen Carter is a good example of, let's face it, he was drafted 9th. He was the best player in that draft by a country mile, pure talent. But from 4 to 8, everyone was terrified, and it took balls to draft him. But you not only needed balls to take him, you needed the infrastructure then of high character leaders. They had Fletcher Cox, Jason Kelce. They had a bunch of Georgia guys. So they took the risk, but they had the infrastructure there. I mean, Saquon and Jalen Carter and Jared Verse were the 2 best players. But Jared Verse, you could argue, relatively easy pick if you need a defensive lineman, high character guy, great player. I mean, Jalen Carter he had to leave the combine to go to the police station. I mean, remember that story? This was a walking red flag who is an all-time great talent. I mean, honestly, one of the more talented guys in the last 5 years of the NFL draft. I mean, today it was just, what is going on? Their talent with just those 2 guys, and then on top of the rest of the talent that they have on the team, how well they can play with their quarterback, I mean, it is conceivable they could win a Super Bowl and he could not throw 150 yards in any playoff game or the Super Bowl. Like that could be
I
on the
thought,
table because how good they are.
yeah, I mean, I said last week, I thought Bo Limmer, the rookie center, 6th-round Arkansas, and Jalen Carter was a problem. I will say this in defense of Sean McVay. I mean, but that safety cut it to 16-15. John, I kept watching this game thinking, how in the hell are the Rams this close? They don't have the personnel. They just don't. I thought their offensive line played well. It was one of those games that got really loose, really fast. It's almost like, it's like when you played the Dodgers in the playoffs. At some point, if you go up against Ohtani, Betts, and Freeman, and there's guys on base, Teoscar Hernandez, you're like, shit, we don't get a break here. Philadelphia can just make play after play after play on both sides of the ball, and the Rams, you really have to be smartly designed to face Philadelphia because the games go sideways. They can go on a 4-play drive and it's Saquon, Goddard, A.J. Brown, Hurts, and you're like, shit, that's 80 yards in 4 plays. But I thought the Rams did a good job to hang around in like really bad weather for an L.A. team on a short week.
I think the conversation has dramatically changed this year, but I think the way Mike Tomlin was talked about probably from like 2015 up until like last year is actually what Sean McVay is. I mean, what he does to overcome as an underdog, I am totally with you. One last week was like a Picasso moment for the guy. His city's on fire. He has to pick up his whole, not just his team, but their family and their animals and fly out to what was a road game at Minnesota. Then take a team. I mean, think about this. We talk about Miami nonstop. Well, they're in 75-degree weather. Well, what weather is LA in? The difference is the way him and Les build that team. Like, they take Jared Verse and Braden Fisk. You know where those guys translate to? They could play in Alaska. They'd be awesome players. Yeah. They build a tough team. This is what the Niners did for years. Build a tough team. It doesn't matter where you play. Part of the reason Miami sucks in cold weather, they have a soft team. For him to go and do that, I mean, Jared Verse, the 3 best players on the field today were Saquon Barkley, Jalen Carter, and Jared Verse, who was a man amongst boys. And the difference is listen, Jalen has a matchup problem against unless you're playing Larry Allen, he's going to be better than your guard or center. Jared Verse is going up against 2 of the better tackles in the league. I mean,
I was watching, John. I was watching today, and the 2 best defensive players I've ever seen in my life are Reggie White and Lawrence Taylor.
Yeah,
and I was just thinking against Philadelphia's O-line, I'm like, holy shit, are we looking at like not Lawrence Taylor, but the closest thing to Lawrence Taylor? Now, I think Lawrence, a lot of what Verse does is he just bulldozes you. He goes right at you. He doesn't have kind of the ability. I don't think he's quite as athletic as Lawrence Taylor, who was.
Yeah.
But you look at Philadelphia's tackles, and you watch what Verse did as a rookie. I mean, I guarantee you, if you're Kyle Shanahan, or you're McDonald in Seattle, or you're the guy down in Arizona, I mean, when you put that film in, you're going to draft an offensive tackle this year. Like, you have to get that right. You cannot face the Rams and Verse for the next 7 years if you don't have your tackles right.
Yeah, I talked to someone who was at a joint practice this year with the Rams, and he said about 5 snaps into their first practice with him, some of their veteran guys on their team were like, holy moly, who is this guy? And the thing with Jared Verse, do you know who he reminds me of? And I don't know if he's going to become this good, but what Khalil Mack was early on in his career with the Raiders.
Yeah.
Because Khalil Mack's first year for the Raiders, he had 4.5 sacks. Because the pushback's always, Verse only had 4.5 sacks. It was pretty clear. I remember a buddy on that coaching staff with the Raiders. Now, their talent on that team wasn't very good. The first OTA practice, he's like, this guy's the best player on our team by a mile. Now, that's not necessarily the case on the Rams because they got Puka and Stafford.
Right.
But he clearly has a chance, like, this guy could win Defensive Player of the Year.
I think he is their best player. I think
you
Matt
could argue
Stafford,
that right now. Him or Puka.
Yeah, Matt, Puka, and Jared Verse. Jared Verse was on the field today with his shirt off before the game. Dude, it just doesn't look normal. Like, it's like, I mean, his speed. Remember last week against Minnesota when he's picked up the fumble and scored, and then he was chasing down Sam Darnold, and you're like, does he run like a 4.45? Like, how fast is he for 265?
Well, it's one thing to have the 9 sacks last week against that offensive line. What they have today, 6 or 7. I mean, they had 16 sacks in 2 games. They said on the broadcast they had under 40 on the season. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
where is this coming from? And to me, it's really, and Braden Fisk went out of the game, which I thought, on some of Saquon's runs, Braden Fisk having him in there as an extra body, that's a big deal. You only dress so many guys in a game. He gets hurt early. I think you saw as the game went on, the attrition of just the guys being out there. But I'm listen, the Eagles should win that. They were basically a touchdown favorite for a reason. Their talent is, I would say now them, the Chiefs, and the Bills, you would say subtract the quarterback. They are the most talented team. But the coaching job by McVay and him hiring his buddy Shula, where there was a lot of pressure, he felt a little
Right.
insecure about how good has that guy been? I mean, down the stretch, getting those guys going. I thought today was I was kind of rooting for the Rams to win because I like historic moments from coaches. And it's like, how is McVay has this team on the brink of a Super Bowl with this talent? And Stafford, he'd been so bad outside. And I know his numbers weren't great, but I
He
thought
was
he made some
fine.
big time plays, when
Yeah,
it
he
had
had a
to be
couple
made.
no-lookers. Saquon Barkley against the Rams this year rushed for 464 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns, 8 receptions for 74 yards. He's a superhero. He basically saved Nick Sirianni from getting canned, Jalen Hurts from harsh criticism, and A.J. Brown going off the rails. I mean, really, this team is about Saquon Barkley.
For sure.
To me, it really is. He's a superhero. It doesn't, I mean, this is what's amazing about that. I have this conversation with people around the league, either reporters or executives. This letting him go to the Eagles from the Giants is to me a fireable offense, and I'm never calling for a GM's job. But Jesus, like I remember when they made that move, and I remember saying on the air, so he's going from arguably the bottom 3-0 line to the best with Jalen Hurts and 2 receivers that you can't cheat in the box. Like Barkley in New York had a quarterback that didn't move, or they didn't do a lot of running with him, and they were bad at receiver because it was pre-Malik Neighbors. So you could just cheat. You could bring a strong safety in the box. So it was like, guys, you can't put a safety in the box against Philly. I mean, it is the least, it's like KD to the Warriors. Although with KD, you thought, well, geez, they got so many guys that want to shoot. On this team, because Jalen's so limited as a passer, he's, as we've discussed, nobody in the league I talked to, everybody went, oh, he may rush for 2,000 yards with this team.
Well, I think John Mara got a lot of weird criticism for his comments in that in Joe Shane's office when he said, "I don't think I can sleep at night if I lose him," and everyone's like, "What? Why is he so obsessed with his star player?" And it's as simple as this guy's been around the team for a long, long time and seen. Obviously, Lawrence Taylor's one of the greatest players. He's seen some of the Eli teams. He has a pretty good understanding of what a superstar player looks like. And it feels a little bit like when Joe Shane said, I don't think he's going to go to the Eagles. And then he goes and he has a historic season. Now he has a historic playoff game. Like when you tell your parents, and they're just like, do not do this, do not do this. And you do it anyway. And then it blows up in your face. And you have to walk back and look them in the eye. How can those guys walk into the office tomorrow if they have to cross John Mara in the hallway? I mean, this guy just carried the team. Your bitter rival that's right down the street. I mean, he's a superstar. Like you say, his individual year is as good of a year. I mean, Terrell Davis got to the Hall of Fame based on 2 years. 2 years. If they were to win the Super Bowl and this guy has another 150 yards, another 160 yards in the playoffs, and he would run for a lot of yards if they play Buffalo because they don't have a great run defense, that's one of those. Obviously, they kept their jobs this year. How could you look at them the same? You cannot look them in the face and go, I can't. I can't. And listen, it's running backs and the value, and we get it, but there aren't that many humans that can play like that on the field. I would say the same thing about the Titans GM got fired. You're like, wait, Derrick Henry just cost the Ravens $8 million? That's what it cost the Ravens, $8 million. And he ran for 1,700 yards. He's clearly one of the best players on the planet. We couldn't have just used that this year. I think sometimes these decisions, get a lot of people fired really fast. I think Joe Shane and Brian Dable are the only reason they have a job right now. And I'm with you. I don't want these guys to lose their job and have to pack up their family. But as John Mara said, he doesn't want to fire anyone anymore. He's just tired of firing people. If he had if these guys had replaced Tom Coughlin, these guys would have been fired 3 weeks ago.
That's right. He doesn't want to be the Raiders. We'll get to a Raiders story before the end of this podcast. And now for our next segment, Whiskey Business, brought to you by Green River Whiskey, the official whiskey of the Colin Cowherd podcast. When you want to enjoy life's simple pleasures, reach for Green River Whiskey. Whether it's rye whiskey or single barrel bourbon, you're getting over a century of craftsmanship packed into every bottle. Hop on over to greenriverwhiskey.com and discover a legend in a bottle today. So let's talk about Jayden Daniels in Detroit. So I'm going to get to Detroit first. So Philadelphia, Nick Sirianni is not a scheme wizard, nor is Dan Campbell. So when Sirianni lost his coordinators, that team circled the drain about Thanksgiving. Campbell's not a scheme guy as well. McVay is. Andy Reid is. They can lose coordinators. It doesn't affect the outcome or the momentum of the franchise. But Dan Campbell probably isn't going to land Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. And I think because of their O-line and running game, I think offensively, they're a double-digit win team for the next 3 to 4 years. But I think there's a chance Detroit takes a slight step back because coordinators, I mean, we've seen it through the playoffs. Spagnuolo is worth, it feels like a touchdown. I mean, he's that valuable in situational football. We're watching McVay. I mean, look what Flores did to the Vikings defense. We know that coordinator.
I think you could say McDermott. I mean, with his personnel, he's a defensive guy. He knows what he's doing.
So I look at the Lions, and they'll be good, but they're going to lose both coordinators. And I also, do you think they're looking at Goff? Because look at this weekend. Goff and Stafford, the last two pocket quarterbacks in the playoff, lost. If it was a really good quarterback year in the draft, I think Detroit would draft one. I really do.
I think Goff, after he got his head slammed, might have been playing a little fuzzy because he had not looked like that really for 2 years. He had, especially in the dome. I think looking back on Detroit, I think the Ravens fall under this too. Last year was your shot. I mean, they kick a field goal. They have a 17-point lead against the 49ers on the road in the second half.
Yeah.
The Baltimore Ravens had Mike McDonald as their defensive coordinator, the number one defense in the league, the MVP at quarterback, and were hosting the Chiefs. So both those two teams get bounced in the second round this year. It's like last year they were controlling their own destiny. And I understand, right. The Lions had home field, but that team on defense, I mean, what happens on that first drive? The guy that just locked up Justin Jefferson 2 weeks ago, his arms pointing the opposite way, so they lose their best corner. It's like their team's already banged up, and they just ran into the greatest rookie quarterback we've ever seen. And they had, even if they wouldn't have turned it over, one of them was a pick six. You can't win a playoff game if the offense is going to score 35-plus points at home. Jared Goff obviously was atrocious. I thought Ben Johnson kind of got weird. I mean, anytime you call a double pass, like the one thing with Jared Goff, he does have a long body of work for you to just turn on him in that moment. The wide receiver is very inclined, whether the guy's open or not, to always throw the ball. And I know the coaches tell him, hey, if it's not open, throw the ball away. They always throw it. And he threw it. You're like, you can't do that. But that's just, you call that play. I thought it was pretty unnecessary. I know you got that he was getting cute, and I tend to agree. I don't know if he's showing off in front of Brady. At that moment, I don't think he's necessarily showing off, but I just thought it was a poorly timed moment. And it felt like he had turned on Jared Goff. He didn't trust him because to call that play in that spot, they were down 10 points.
How about this? Josh Harris in 2011 buys with a group the Sixers. He still hasn't gotten to an Eastern Conference championship with Joel Embiid, who's always hurt. He buys the Commanders' first-year NFC championship, which shows you why this league is so great. Houston was the embarrassment of the league, playoffs. Washington had a 15-year smell with Dan Snyder, NFC championship. One of the reasons I love this league, I mean, a year ago, we thought Denver was just, they were a heap of tires on the freeway on fire.
Yeah.
The Commanders, for the next 3 years, can just surround Jayden Daniels with talent. And I want to talk about him. He had a 5-game stretch, middle of the season. He got banged up. Bo Nix started to surge. And you were like, okay, Jayden's more athletic maybe. But, but his last 8 games, his ability, I've never seen anything like this. His last 10 games, it says here, 20 touchdowns, 7 picks, 98 passer rating. And they played some good teams. his ability to he's not Lamar the runner. And I'll tell you why it's an advantage. Lamar is so gifted as a runner, so is Michael Vick. Steve Young was to a large degree too, and Josh Allen. That you're so great as a runner, it's always an easy out, especially in high school and college. It's just an easy. Jayden's fast, but he's not quite a Vic or a Josh Allen when he can roll over you. But what he is, he's evasive, more so than like Kyler Murray. So
Yeah.
he's fast enough to get out of trouble, but he's not as big and strong as Allen or as shifty or pure speed as Lamar. So he's always relied on the pocket, right? Like he sits in the pocket. He feels so advanced to me as a late game pocket passer. I thought Andrew Luck was the best rookie quarterback I ever saw, but you got downside with him. He was a risk taker. He had a little Sam Darnold and Carson Wentz. I get no downside with this kid. None.
If you just look at the best players in the NFL at quarterback, there's like 3 or 4 guys. And, I think Mahomes and Josh Allen are much more playmakers than true pocket quarterbacks. Obviously, Lamar's a hybrid. It would really be Burrow. And what do Burrow and Jayden have in common? They both had to transfer to LSU. Their first year at LSU did not go well. And their second year, they kind of mastered it. Well, think about this. Burrow's the talent he went against on defense every day in practice was better than Jayden's. But think about you play every year Alabama, a Nick Saban Alabama, so with several NFL guys on the front. You play A&M, who's always loaded with talent, and you just play an SEC schedule. So over the course of a couple years, after you had already been in another school, got some reps, Jayden had played at ASU, Burrow hadn't, and you kind of get to master your craft. Because I watch Jayden Daniels, and you go, he's pretty calm, like Joe Burrow in the pocket,
Yes.
And he was considered this dual threat because last year it was like, well, he's really good deep ball thrower. That was like his Russell Wilson thing. But over the middle of the field, blitzes can get him. He looks completely under control. That's the craziest part about his game is how cool, calm, and collected he is. To me, he's the more athletic running version of Burrow because he really plays much more like a pocket quarterback. How good is he throwing over the middle of the field? Yeah. I mean, that to me is the crazy part.
In congested areas, it's just incredible. And my favorite part of this is I thought like Cam Ward was a winner this weekend. You're watching Jayden Daniels come out of that draft, and Tennessee's probably thinking, well, I mean, Cam Ward's like a thicker version of him. Like Jayden Daniels' ability to just improvise. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury, Steve Kime was texting me. He's like, Cliff Kingsbury, after that mess at USC in Arizona, he's like, he earned this and deserved it. But I just think sometimes people are special. And whereas Mahomes got to sit for his first year and Lamar didn't play until week 11, this kid was inserted onto a really, I would argue, at best second, probably third best roster in that division. And the other thing is, and Brian Kelly said this in college, he said he's just a great student of the game. He was good early, little turbulent middle of the season, got banged up. He's just gotten better. He's a better quarterback now than he was 10 weeks ago.
Totally. I was thinking about this. Think about the first 3 quarterbacks, Caleb, him, and Drake. Caleb goes to a place where every coach got fired halfway through the season. Drake goes to a place where clearly the guy was in over his head. And this guy gets to go to Dan Quinn, who had taken a team to a Super Bowl, had gone to Kingsbury, who had coached in the NFL, had been a head coach for a long, long time as the play caller head coach in college and the pros, of just a very stable place immediately because they don't have that much talent. McLaurin's a good player, but Zach Ertz is like my age. Yeah. The Brown guy, most people that follow the NFL don't know that much about. Defensively, Bobby Wagner's been in the league forever. I mean, he's on hole 17 or 18 of his career.
It's at best, John, at best, it's the 12th to 15th best roster in the league, at best.
I think it's probably closer to low 20s, and what he's doing and the coaching staff's doing. And there's something in football, right, more than these other sports. Like in baseball, I can't, even if Bochy's my manager, if I don't have the talent, I can't overachieve against the Dodgers over 6-7 games, right? If I'm playing the KD Warriors or the Shaq Kobe Lakers, I'm fucked. Phil Jackson and it doesn't. John Wooden could be the coach. In football, coaching staffs, one, just the belief coming into a game. I think we saw it today with McDermott and the Bills. They believed they could win that game. That matters a lot. The Lions have had this for a couple years with Dan Campbell, and then the schematics of everything. But there is just an element of they just got this guy. I mean, they go for it a lot on these fourth and shorts because they got this guy.
That's right.
Fourth and 2 with Jameis Winston or some random quarterback is not the same. Like I think part of the reason he's going for it constantly is this guy. The Lions do it a lot. They got the best offensive line in the league. They got a star tight end. They got a star wide receiver. They got multiple backs. It's a high percentage play. It's not the same if you got Tommy DeVito in that offensive line, right? So things aren't all equal. I don't think he's this crazy gunslinger. He's just going, we have one of the most dynamic players I've probably ever seen.
Yeah, I said this yesterday on my pod. You knew you had something special when a veteran coach, Dan Quinn, and, a guy who had been a head coach in 2 places, Cliff Kingsbury, in camp, were effusive with their praise. I mean, the rule with rookie quarterbacks is he'll get there. Let's lower expectations. And they kept talking to Dan Quinn. Zach Ertz told me this last week. He's like, yeah, this is different. This doesn't look like this is way better than a rookie quarterback. And I remember people saying that about Andrew Luck, how he memorized the Colts playbook in like 2.5 days. The instincts, the poise, to me, it's just unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it. And again, I wouldn't have guessed he would be the greatest rookie quarterback of all time. In week 8, he had played bad against Pittsburgh, a couple of picks against the Cowboys. He was banged up. His last 8 weeks, it's like, is he a top 5 quarterback in the league? He may be.
I had a scouting buddy text me last night and said, the Bears didn't even bring in Jayden Daniels for a visit. And listen, I'm not trying to write off Caleb's career. We've seen Peyton Manning was bad as a rookie. By all means, he can turn.
Caleb is not this accurate. No way.
But your job as a GM, Adam Peters took a lot of crap because remember he had all 5 quarterbacks not named Caleb Williams. He took them to Topgolf. That's kind of his job to evaluate everybody who's going to be available. So I think you look back at Ryan Poles, it would have taken a lot of balls to not take Caleb Williams. It was the easy pick. But his job isn't to placate to the media. His job is to get it right and get the right player. And they didn't even look at this guy. And listen, Caleb can become a good player. This guy it's mind-blowing because his team's not that talented. It'd be one thing. It's like, well, he inherited this great roster. They actually traded up from pick 20 to pick 2 to get him. No, this team was terrible. It's essentially the same roster that we all made fun of last year with Ron Rivera that ended up at number 2. And it's actually not because remember, they traded Sweat midseason. They traded Chase Young. They don't even have a great defensive line. I mean, they don't have many defensive line beside the tackles. It's crazy what he's doing. Their running backs are Eckler, who's a good little scat back.
Yeah.
McNichols, who Adam Peters likes. And Brian Robinson, who a couple, midseason started fumbling, so they kind of kicked to the curb. It's not like they're handing the ball to Saquon, right? I mean, that's not what's going on here. It's crazy.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Amazon Prime for a minute. I've got mine. Do you have yours? Not just about one thing. It's a whole collection of services that help you get the most out of whatever you're into. If you're passionate about a hobby, a sport, or all sports in my case, or you just need to get things done fast, Amazon Prime's got your back. You can watch content, order supplies, listen on Amazon Music. It's all included under one Prime membership. Of course, we can all agree one of the best things about Prime is the fast, free delivery. With Prime, you can have what you need delivered the same day, but it's more than that. Prime is a collection of excellent services. I love it. Amazon Music, listen to the tunes that keep you in the zone, or this podcast, whatever you're doing, working out, on the road. Prime doesn't just help you get closer to the things you care about. It helps you discover new things too. Prime's always there to fuel your passion. Make it just a little bit easier. So whatever you're into, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime now. Let's talk Kansas City, Houston. So Houston had the worst special teams performance by any team in the playoffs that I can remember, starting with the opening kickoff by the Chiefs. They also had 8 penalties. There were a couple of calls. I thought the referees over the course of the weekend let guys play, and then they clearly on 2 instances got overprotective of Mahomes. It's what happens when you're the marquee player in the league. The team Kansas City had 212 yards, and Travis Kelce had 117 of them. It's interesting because dynasties, it reminds me a lot of Gronk. Dynasties tend to do this. New England had it. Kansas City has it. And I've seen this, Steelers had this probably if you go back to their dynasty, maybe the Niners did, that dynasty very well. In television terms and local TV, there's kind of a term like red light guys. Like when the red light of the camera goes on, you're on a live shot.
Yeah.
My buddy I work with for years, Trace Gallagher's a good friend. He's at Fox News. We bounced around the country together, getting jobs in the same stations or markets. And the first thing I noticed, his first job in Las Vegas is I'd never seen anybody that could get dropped off in front of a hotel fire and we could go 12 minutes with very little information and just talk. And I'm like, that's a red light guy. And that's Travis Kelce. Like when you look at this season, and I mean, there have been times the last 2 years, John, I've looked at him in week 4 and thought he looks overweight. Like I'm not even, I mean, I don't even know what you do with him. It's like Gronk. You get those big mitts in big games. He gets open. He is just, I mean, dynasties always have one of these guys. And by the way, you can tell who Mahomes trusts. He's building a trust with Xavier Worthy. He really likes Kareem Hunt, but he is looking for Travis Kelce on big plays.
Yeah, to me, you hear a lot is like, how's 87 always open in these big moments? It's like, well, guys, he's not running just routes that these teams have prepared for, right? There are plays that every team runs, and if you're running this defense, kind of cheat here, this is where he wants to go. He will go wherever you don't. And Mahomes knows that and then will go to him. So in these biggest moments, it's like, well, we know what play they're going to run, and he should end up in this like 2-yard radius. Instead of hang a left, he'll hang a right because he knows that, and he'll be wide open. It kind of feels like almost like John Stockton and Karl Malone in the pick and roll. I'm sure there are some basic defensive rules for coaches, but they knew each other so well by the peak of their powers. You could go left, they could go right, and he knew he would go right. And that's what it feels like in these big moments because he gets open, and it's not because someone's just screwing up. It's because they're playing chess, and you can't play on their level. They're Bobby Fischer at this point, those two guys. Because on his big play that kind of exploded the game open, he's not as fast as he once was. His top end speed used to be elite for a tight end, and now it's probably average, like NFL average. But his instincts with the ball in his hands are still elite as it gets. Just like Gronk, as he got older, he couldn't move like he once could, but he still had the strength and he still had the size that was his separating factor. Travis's separating factor is his instinctive athleticism. He's like, at this point, Michael Jordan, 1998. Michael Jordan wasn't jumping and dunking over guys then, but he was so much smarter than you, and his instincts were so elite. That to me is Travis. So it's like, his ninth 100-yard game does not look like the game in 17 when he was running by guys, because he's not really running by guys now. He's making moves to get around guys. So listen, he's one of the greatest champions this league has ever seen. And Andy said it last night. Mahomes said it. He's not just a bright lights guy. Like, I just think he's smarter than you. I think his football intellect and IQ is Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Steve Young at tight end, which I would say is pretty rare.
Yeah, and Kansas City gets dinged on because we say, it's kind of lucky, but they are, John, they are taking leads on people. That's what they do. They kind of come out, they take a lead on you a lot of the times now. They don't make many mistakes, and then what they do in the second half is they start getting really situationally great on third, on fourth down, on goal line stands. And I think, John, you and I have talked about this, and I think this is now more true than ever. There are 5 things you have to be really good at in the NFL, like head coach, quarterback. You have to have a stable O-line, one reliable weapon. It can be Kelce, it could be Puka, it could be Saquon Barkley. You have to have a reliable weapon, and you have to have some defensive presence on the D-line, a difference maker, which now the Lions don't really have. No. The Bills have a Von Miller. They have, by the way, their weapons, their running backs in Buffalo are underrated in my opinion. But I think about Kansas City is this weekend, 2 or 3 things were really on display. Quarterback, Jayden Daniels probably was one of the stars of the weekend. But I think when you watch McVay and Andy Reid's teams, they are so resourceful. Like they just figure out ways to convert, and even if it's a field position, even if it's stopping you on third or getting an extra first down, I just feel like they're always winning the margins, and that's why it's not luck. They just do that regularly.
Why I think one knock on Andy and Philly, fair or not, was the situational stuff. And I think
Yeah,
situationally, you look back, well, like was it him or was it, Donovan McNabb was really out of shape in the Super Bowl and not make
yeah,
some great decisions. Michael Vick was just a hard guy to coach because of the way he played. And I think he's like Bill Walsh finally found his Joe Montana. Andy Reid found his Mahomes, and now I think he's situationally brilliant. And D'Amico yesterday, like it's two-sided. D'Amico is a stud. Like that team showed up ready to win. D'Amico is a high level coach. I mean, I think one of the best, if not the best, young coach in the league on defense. I mean, D'Amico's awesome. But kicking that ball into the wind for the field goal, it's like this is
yeah,
what are we doing here? It's almost like a
yeah.
par five over the water. It's like a layup. This is not a good decision. And then late in the game, who was calling that game? Was it Collinsworth or Brady? Whoever was calling that game was like, it was Aikman. He's like, I'd call timeout because it was fourth and
Yes,
long,
yes, yes.
and Aikman's like, I'd call. They're all discombobulated. Call timeout. You either got to call timeout or just take the delay game and punt. He was just in no man's land, and that was this is not week 4 or week 10. That was their
John,
season.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That is McVay and Reed. That's the difference between McVay and Reed. Aikman, a former quarterback, is screaming on TV, take a timeout. You've got to take a timeout. The defensive coaches, and I like D'Amico, but I swear if McVay or Reed in that situation, they would have called a timeout.
Got to.
And when you're on the road and your special teams are a grease fire, you have to get that play right. That's one of those classic, nobody in Houston wants to talk about it. It's about the officiating. That play is why I tend to lean toward offensive coaches. It's that playoff football, situational, circumstantial moment. I'm glad you brought that up because that to me was a seminal play in the game.
I do think this, and I love Andy, Nagy, Veach. Those guys are my guys. But the Mahomes going out of bounds and stopping is not just unbecoming. It's got to stop and it's got to be penalized. I remember when it happened against the Niners earlier this season, and Nick Bosa said it's all the officiating is against these defensive players. I mean, there was a play today when Devontae Smith got blown up. In the history of the NFL up until 3 or 4 years ago, that's called a hospital ball when you throw that ball in the middle of the field and get him killed. Now it's a 15-yard penalty. The Mahomes thing of stopping at the sideline, and look, they didn't end up calling a penalty there. But one, he's going to get hurt. It's just stupid. Just go out of bounds. And he does this sometimes. He stops and you stop, and then he gains a couple extra yards. That I don't blame the Chiefs and Mahomes. Like it's like Chris Paul and James Harden. That's his version of what he's doing. The league has to say if that happens again, we're going to penalize you. And I don't know exactly how they do it. And listen, I thought the second penalty on Mahomes, the unnecessary roughness where they hit each other in the head and he didn't even get really touched was pretty egregious. But that was the worst moment of all. And this is to me a Mahomes thing of like, I'm pro you guys, but it's starting to get embarrassing because it's like, this is unfair. It's already not fair to the defense, what the rules are. But that moment is like, I'm all for loopholes in life. That feels like a loophole that's just screwing over people. And honestly, I was surprised they didn't throw the 15-yard penalty.
NFL playoffs? We're talking about NFL playoffs? You bet we are. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is a key to winning in the NFL playoffs, and the key to you scoring big is betting on them. At DraftKings, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. If you're ready to place your first bet, make it really simple. A player scoring a touchdown. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook's app, download it, make your pick. Here's another reason to watch your favorite players crush it on the playoffs. If you're a new customer, you bet $5, that's it. $5, get $200 in bonus bets instantly by betting just $5. So score big, DraftKings Sportsbook during the playoffs. Download the app, use the code Colin, COLIN. That will get you $200 in bonus bets if you bet the $200. So if you want $200 in bonus bets, you got to put in the code Colin. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook, the crown is yours. Okay, I want to touch on this. So we're going to start seeing here in the next week some coaches, I imagine. This week, do you think we'll see some coaches take jobs? Because I saw a story today, and there's so much information out there. I can't separate fact from fiction, like rumor from substantial, unless it's somebody I trust. But one of the things floated out there is Ben Johnson actually is leaning Raiders. And I thought, whoa, whoa, whoa. Toughest division, no quarterback, impulsive owner, and one of the poorest owners. Mahomes, Herbert, even Bo Nix. I'm like, weak quarterback draft? What in the hell are you doing? Give me your feeling. And maybe that's the power of Brady, who's clearly running the franchise right now. Like that clear, obvious. If you were Ben Johnson, because I thought New England was the best job, and I thought Vrabel was the best candidate. Like I thought Harbaugh was the best candidate, and the Chargers was the best job last year. I don't think it's hard to spot. You could see it a mile away. Where would you go if you were Ben Johnson? They're all somewhat dysfunctional.
To me, I could understand going to the Raiders if you told me Tom Brady lived in Las Vegas and was going to be doing this full time, and I essentially answered to him. But that is not what is happening. He's going to stay in Florida, and by all reports, going to keep rocking with Fox. Mark Davis is the guy in that building every single day. So even if you just go, don't even factor in the roster or the division with the coaches and the quarterbacks, the Mark Davis situation is not one that I could get into business if I have options. The problem is, what are his other options? The Bears. I'm sorry, like at least with, if you can't fix Caleb, it'll kind of be on you, not him, because of the hype coming in, and you're going to have to coach him for a couple of years. And what if you're not that into him? And you got to answer to Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren. I'm sorry, the Jags, like if Trent Baalke's there, I'm not taking that job.
Same.
The Jets, he didn't even interview. So I do understand the Raiders, like Tom Brady, maybe he's just an all-time great salesman. But if I was recommending to Ben Johnson, I'd go, well, is he going to be there every day? Because if he's not, like Mark Davis used to yell at assistant coaches on the plane. And I'm not, people are going to say, you're just a Raider hater. No, I'm just telling you that used to happen a lot. Well, it's been reported on. Like, it's just a chaotic organization, right? I mean, it just, I think going there, especially if you factor in the division, no quarterback, it's not like a quarterback draft, pretty nuts. And I would have been like, well, maybe he can take his, Matt Schaub with him or whatever, his backup quarterback. Last night, Hendon Hooker, they clearly don't trust him because they made him the third string quarterback, and Teddy Bridgewater, who's coaching high school, was the backup quarterback. I mean, that shows you it's not like he even likes the backup guy to take with him. So I would say talent just on the roster, the Bears, but that situation's kind of messed up. The only good thing the Raiders have going for them is you get to essentially hire your GM as well. But like I've seen that dog and pony show. Gruden and got to hire, what's his name, from the NFL Network. Josh McDaniels got to bring Ziegler. They all fail. You could argue this cycle is just awful. Maybe just stay with the Lions. Don't touch any of these jobs. I get there's a lot of money on the line. Schefter saying he's good as gone. I think all these jobs are terrible, Colin. I mean, terrible.
No, the only one I like, because remember, we thought the Washington job was a bit of a risk. I actually think I've been lucky on this. 3 years in a row, I've picked the double-digit win team. Denver this year, Rams last year, Minnesota before, where there's a team, and I think they're twice as good as Vegas thinks. I actually think because the Jets and Miami are pretty dysfunctional, and I actually think between Kraft, Drake May,
I'm not counting that one. I agree with you.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good job actually. But I think the next year Patriots could make the playoffs because, I mean, let's be honest about it. Like Steelers are going backwards. They can't. We know who's going to win divisions. Like the AFC is pretty damn predictable. If you told me the same four teams ended up back here, I would say I think the Chargers with another 4 or 5 players with Harbaugh and Herbert will be better. But I just thought that rumor for Ben Johnson to the Raiders, and it's funny because I've bounced around the country before, and I get people, and the things I always think about whenever I join a job, I've had to replace really good people. I replaced Tony Kornheiser at ESPN. Even locally, I replaced a couple of really talented people. At Fox, it was easier because the network FS1 was kind of, it just wasn't substantial. But one of the things I look at is, who was the predecessor? And so that's the one thing I like about the job is you're going to be a really clever offensive coach, but I got to tell you, they'd have to give up so much draft capital to get Cam Ward, and they just don't have a roster good enough. I don't know how you don't consider Reed, Harbaugh, and Sean Payton. How do you not consider that?
I started texting around because Mike Borgazzi, Veach's number two, took the Titans job. And
Yeah.
I texted my buddies on different teams. I said, what's the difference? Because you would say the Titans job. I mean, they've just run through two GMs in like a year. So that's a pretty risky job, right? Even though they got the number one overall pick, but it's not like viewed as Andrew Luck or Peyton Manning in this draft. Cam Ward is a very risky player. I mean, I've texted my friends, their college directors, draft grades are all over the board on that kid. This is
Yeah.
not viewed, and Shador. And they said simply because as the number two, depending on your organization, you make anywhere between $700 to $1 million, depending on your experience. As a GM, you get a 5-year contract, usually somewhere $3 to $4 million. And that's obviously substantial game changing money. But as an assistant coach for Ben Johnson, let's say he's making $4 or $5 million, and it's for how are the Lions not going to be good on offense next year?
Oh,
So
they will. Yeah.
his star wouldn't diminish. Now, as a head coach, he might get 10 to 12, but that's a big difference of like going from 100 grand to 500 grand, which changes your life. He's making $5 million. He's at the office 90 hours. His life doesn't change at all when he makes $12 million. He gets more money in the bank, but he's 39, 40 years old. He's going to be a head coach. These jobs, like, okay, you get a 4-year contract. I see the Raiders fire someone every other year. I see the Bears is not a conducive place to win. The Jags with Trent Baalke, he will stab you in the back if the offense looks terrible. These jobs, I don't. He didn't interview with the Jets, and the Cowboys feel dead set on Kellen Moore. That like these jobs are places where people go to get fired, and it changes your career.
Yeah, I said this before. Next year's a much better college quarterback class, and you also have the potential that like Joe Burrow would need a coach. You kind of look around and you're like, oh, there's next year's interesting. There could be some interesting job openings, and if you look at the last 2 years, I mean, just think of the last 4 or 5 jobs that a coach took that we considered really good jobs. Matt LaFleur, Aaron Rodgers in his prime, Mike McCarthy, Dak in his prime, Jim Harbaugh, Justin Herbert going into his prime, and Mike Vrabel. Drake May looks like he could be really special, kind of a Justin Herbert comp. What you look at as a head coach is, do they have the quarterback right? In the Raiders, you face 2 of the top 8 quarterbacks and the best quarterback, and arguably 2 of the top 4 coaches, and you don't have a quarterback. Like, to me, I listed a couple of weeks ago of the 7 openings, 1 through 7. I put the Raiders last. So to me, it's just Tom Brady has this gravitas or this aura, and Ben Johnson's kind of starry-eyed, but I would stay in Detroit.
Yeah, I think the Bears is a sexy job in theory, but also a lot like the Raiders. Division's really good. All 3 teams, I mean, I know they went 0-3 in the playoffs. Like, wouldn't shock us if at minimum 2 of those 3 teams are back in the playoffs. Another job I would put as this being like, doesn't quite fit the criteria of Dak or definitely Aaron Rodgers, but Seattle, ton of talent. They had a guy that you can function with, and they have a high level GM and a team that had just been kind of winning. Not big, but 9 games a year. And Mike McDonald, that was a safe job. Seattle last year is way better than any of these jobs when you factor in GM that knows what he's doing, ton of talent on the roster, and just a stable place. I think the Bears, and I got a DM, an unsolicited beat DM, that said they thought this Raider thing, he could still end up in Chicago. Because listen, he's trying to get a lot of money. I mean, there is a chance that if he gets a couple teams bidding against him, that his salary instead of being $10 million could be like 50. He could be one of the higher paid coaches in the league just based on like NFL free agency, right? When guys get overpaid because you got people driving up the price. I don't know, man. I'd have a hard time accepting it. I couldn't do the Bears because of the setup. And the Raiders thing, I get it. You bring in your guy, but that is a tough building to change when the number one reason you'd be doing it is because Tom, and he lives on the other side of the country.
All right, so we go into Ohio State and Notre Dame. I think we both probably like the Buckeyes. I'll throw this out to you. I said this last week on radio and TV. I don't think Marcus Freeman has the horses to win. But if he kept it close or by chance won, I wonder if he's not the second best candidate to Mike Vrabel. I mean, there's a Sean McVay quality to this guy that people that have met him are just kind of blown away by him.
Yeah.
And first, do you think Notre Dame has a chance? And do you think if he put on a McVay-like classic where, I mean, the fact that the Rams had the ball late with a chance to win made no sense,
Crazy.
right? Like, it just made no sense at all.
Did you
In
fall out of your
Philly,
chair when he hit Puka down the sideline?
I could not
My
believe it.
jaw.
I went, you have got to be kidding me. I
Was
literally
crazy.
sat there and thought, this is going to be the ultimate theft. They have no business being in this game.
Would have been crazy.
And I don't think Notre Dame has any business being in that game. If it was 30-10, I wouldn't be shocked. If you were Marcus Freeman, knowing that Notre Dame, the academic umbrella, the religious realities, the campus isn't a cold weather campus, not in the Big Ten. If you're Marcus Freeman and won, would you go to the NFL?
No, because these jobs are terrible. I think we just saw Sark re-up with Texas.
Yeah.
Being a head coach in college now pays $10 to $12 million. You're the coach GM and your owner does not exist. Now with the NIL situation, that's why Belichick was kind of intrigued. It's actually much more like the NFL, and you don't have an owner breathing down your
Players
neck
come
every
to
Monday
you.
morning. Yeah, with his 3 kids telling you 7 different ideas of what plays to call. I actually think college has kind of changed in the sense of the money's huge. And a place like Notre Dame, you can pay your coordinators just no different than the NFL.
Yeah.
Where's he going to go? Like, I guess you go the Bears right down the street, but I just don't think the Bears a good job. He then has to answer to Kevin Warren and deal with Ryan Poles, where he's the Ryan Poles. And his Kevin Warren is who? The father? I mean, it's like, as long as he's winning, they leave him alone.
I was thinking about this. Ryan Day was going to get run out of town without the playoff, right? Because he wouldn't have got into the Final Four because of that home loss to Michigan.
Yeah.
And that in a weird way, the 12-team playoff is a little like March Madness. March Madness, because it's so vast with 68 teams, guys like Jim Boeheim, he could always say, well, I made the tournament. I've made the tournament 14 straight years. I think
that's Calipari's thing for a decade. He hasn't done shit.
Yeah, I mean, he was losing to like Oakland at school in Michigan. He was losing, but in the end, you could always say, "Well, I made the tournament. I made the tournament 22 years, and I won a couple games in the tournament. I made the Sweet 16, which really isn't that hard if you're like a UConn and who you face in the first 2 games. But I think if you get to the 12-team playoff every year and you win your opening game, it's hard to fire a guy because the reality is, Chad Millman and I talked about this. Northern schools in the NIL, most of them have more money. I think it's 12 of the top 23 schools in terms of enrollment size are Big Ten schools. They have a lot of graduates. A lot of those kids make a lot of money. They give money back to the university. And that I think the money between Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, even, I mean, God, USC's up in the 20 million now. They may not spend it wisely, but they have a lot of money in their collective. And my take is nobody's going undefeated in college football. You will be able to eventually get in with 3 losses, but certainly 2. You can lose to your rival at home as a 21-point favorite, Ohio State. And then I think guys like, if Ryan Day wins a natty, he's set for the next 4 years. I think this playoff was great for college coaches.
Well, think about this. If, remember when baseball, if there were no wild cards, you had to win your division to get into the playoffs? If that would have been in the NFL, Tom Coughlin wouldn't have made it past like 2008. I mean, he won both his Super Bowls as a wild card. So forever, like you said, neither one of these teams would have been in the Final Four. So I do give them a fighting chance, Notre Dame, because I think you saw with Texas, if you have a really good defense, ugly the thing up, just stay in the game, and then your quarterback needs to make some plays. Your guy, Riley Leonard's coming around on me. He made some big throws in that game against Penn State. 2 huge throws. If he can be Superman, control the clock, run the ball. I heard people saying they run a lot of man-to-man defense where Texas played a lot of zone against them, and it slowed down Jeremiah Smith. So can they change their defensive game plan? Al Golden's a really good defense. Like, the coaching in this game and really in the Final Four. I mean, all these coordinators are 7-figure guys. I thought the Final Four in college football felt like today in the NFL. It was a really high level 2 nights. And I do think, coaching belief, like if you're Notre Dame right now, you've just beat Georgia and Penn State. You just talked about the talent. Both those rosters, if you polled the top 30 college coaches, they would take Georgia and Penn State's roster over Notre Dame, right? Over Marcus Freeman. So they have to be believing that they can win. Now, this is going to be the toughest test. But what if Will Howard, who had a little stretch where he looked like Peyton Manning in his prime, just has an off half? A turnover. Sometimes you just get a freaky fumble. For a split second, I thought the Ravens were going to win, and then Mark Andrews fumbles the ball. Right? I thought the Rams were going to win, and then all of a sudden Jalen Carter sacks. A big play in a key moment. These are 19-year-old guys, not 32-year-old four-time Pro Bowler guy worth $100 million who's seen, who's already been divorced, seen a lot in his life. Things can change fast. We saw Ohio State. They got in that weird game with Michigan and kind of crumbled. The only thing is, I do think from that moment on, it's been like an enlightening moment for the team. But I think you could say the same thing about Notre Dame, that NIU loss, right? Kind of was an enlightening moment for them. They have not looked back since. So I'm rooting for Notre Dame. I'm an Ohio State hater, but I just think it'd be a pretty cool story if Notre Dame, it'd be one of the bigger upsets. I mean, what are they, 8.5-point underdog?
Well, if Marcus Freeman with his energy, and I think you see this now in college football, a lot of these older coaches like Brian Kelly, I'm not sure. I don't think he wants to. I mean, Chip Kelly wouldn't recruit at the end. I don't think Brian he's not.
Well, look at the best recruiters. It's Kirby, Dabo for a long time, who's kind of viewed a little older now, but Ryan Day, Steve Sarkisian. I mean, that's the thing with Lincoln. It's like, Lincoln, you're young. Where's your energy with this? Dan Lanning. It's like these guys. Kenny Dillingham. I mean, you need some. It's a lot.
It is. All right, John Middlekauff. Loved chopping it up for about an hour and 10, 15 minutes. Loved it. He has a podcast, 3 and Out, former NFL scout, and Ohio State Notre Dame. We're doing this Sunday night on the docket for tomorrow. Thanks, buddy.
See you tomorrow.
I judge the quality of a fragrance by the compliments you get. When I wore Ovation for the first time, second time, and third time, usually I walk past somebody and they're like, hey, what you got on? Who over there smelling good? That's the injection of confidence right there to you.
That's right. We want to be at the forefront of using the brand as a gateway for these young athletes. Custom suit, we do a photo shoot, we do video, and it's all about that partnership to create a personal brand.
And I love you guys associating it with more sophistication. Throwing a suit on a kid, sometimes it takes for you to see yourself with a suit on in the mirror to be like, hey, I have more to offer.
Ovation for Men, we're part of Amazon's Black Business Accelerator. Amazon has invested $150 million for the next 4 years to uplift small businesses like myself to scale. Amazon is really putting their money where their mouth is.
They're committed to excellence on every level. They want to scale these businesses to be amongst the best in whatever industry they're in.
You've always been authentic. You've always been pushing excellence.
Well, I appreciate that.
As our slogan says, every man deserves an ovation.
Yes, sir.
Listen, this relationship with Ovation for Men, Richard Sherman, The Volume, this is just the beginning.
I appreciate you guys letting me be a part of your journey. If you haven't already checked them out, go out there, get your man some. And get the sport too. And it can be Christmas, birthday, holidays, or yesterday. But make sure you get it.